the story of a slave who rose to the top and became pharaoh. The desert wind howled over the golden dunes of ancient Egypt, carrying with it whispers of kingdoms, gods, and destinies yet to unfold. Beneath the blazing sun, a young boy named Ammonius stumbled across the hot sand, his ankles bound by rope, his wrists sore from chains. He was no prince, no warrior, only a slave bought for a handful of copper coins. Ammonius had been taken from a small village near the Nile Delta, where his family once farmed the riverbanks. Raiders had come one night, men wearing jackal masks and carrying torches. They burned homes, seized children, and vanished into the dark. When Ammonius awoke, he was on a boat bound for Thebes, the great city of pharaohs. For years, Ammonius toiled in silence within the vast palace of Pharaoh Seti, a ruler feared and worshipped alike. The boy's duties were simple yet cruel: cleaning the stone floors, carrying water, polishing statues of gods he was forbidden to pray to. His hands were blistered, his back scarred, but his spirit refused to break. Each night, when other slaves slept, he would sit by the small oil lamp and study the carvings on the temple walls, hieroglyphs that told stories of gods, stars, and men who shaped history. Ammonius was fascinated by knowledge. He believed that words held power greater than swords. One day, as he swept near the royal scribes, he paused to watch them write. The scribe master, an old man named Menfer, noticed his gaze. "You like symbols, boy?" he asked. Ammonius hesitated, afraid to speak. "Yes, master," he whispered. Menfer smirked. "Slaves have no need for knowledge. Knowledge is for the free." But that night, as fate would have it, Menfer found one of his papyrus rolls missing. Days later, he discovered Ammonius behind the granary, copying letters into the sand with a stick. Instead of punishing him, the old scribe stared for a long moment, then chuckled softly. "You're either a fool or a genius," he said. "Come before dawn tomorrow. If anyone asks, you're cleaning the floors." That was how Ammonius' secret education began. Every morning before the sun touched the pyramids, he met Menfer in the shadowed halls of the temple library. There he learned to read, write, and count. He studied astronomy, agriculture, and even medicine. The more he learned, the more his mind soared beyond the palace walls. He no longer saw himself as a slave, but as something more, a man destined to rise above chains. Years passed, and Ammonius grew into a strong young man. His sharp mind caught the attention of others, even nobles who never noticed slaves before. When an epidemic struck the servants' quarters, Ammonius used the herbs and poultices he'd learned about to heal dozens. Word of his skills spread until one day, Princess Nephra, daughter of Pharaoh Seti, summoned him. The princess was known for her beauty, but also her cold heart. She sat upon a throne of alabaster, her eyes sharp like obsidian. "You are the slave who heals," she said. "Is that true?" "I try to help my lady," Ammonius replied humbly. Nephra's handmaiden was gravely ill, and none of the royal physicians could cure her. Ammonius was brought to the royal chamber, where he mixed herbs and recited quiet prayers to the gods. Within days, the girl began to recover. Pharaoh himself heard of it. "Bring the slave before me," Pharaoh commanded. Ammonius stood before the throne, trembling. The hall was filled with gold, incense, and the sound of chanting priests. Pharaoh Seti's gaze was like that of a lion, piercing and heavy. "They say you defied death," Pharaoh said. "You saved a life that even my healers could not." "I only used what the earth provides, my lord," Ammonius answered softly. Pharaoh leaned forward. "What is your name?" "Ammonius." "A slave with the name of a god," the pharaoh said, amused. "Tell me, Ammonius, what do you desire?" The hall went silent. Every noble watched him, expecting him to beg for gold, freedom, or favor. But Ammonius raised his head and said, "I wish to serve Egypt with my knowledge." Pharaoh's laughter echoed through the hall. "A slave who wishes to serve Egypt? Very well, Ammonius. From this day forth, you shall no longer carry water. You will study under my scholars. Let us see if your mind is truly a gift of the gods, or a trick of fate." And so, the boy who once swept palace floors began his journey among Egypt's learned men. But beyond the shining halls, jealousy stirred. Nobles whispered of a slave rising too high. Priests questioned whether the gods approved. And somewhere deep in his heart, Ammonius knew that knowledge alone would not protect him from the storm that was coming. He had escaped the chains of labor, yet new chains of envy and power awaited him. The desert winds had brought him to the palace, but destiny was far from done with him. The years rolled forward like the great river Nile, steady, unstoppable, and filled with hidden depths. Under Pharaoh Seti's favor, Ammonius rose from being a mere servant to a student among the royal scholars. The halls that once echoed with the whip's crack now echoed with his footsteps and the turning of scrolls. Ammonius studied everything the priests and scholars knew: geometry, star maps, medicine, and the art of leadership. His teachers were men who had served pharaohs for decades, yet even they began to whisper in awe of the young man's brilliance. His eyes held questions that few dared to ask, and his tongue spoke with the calm of a man who understood both poverty and power. But not everyone welcomed him. One man in particular despised him, Vizier Rekhmire, Pharaoh's most trusted advisor and a man whose pride matched his influence. Rekhmire had ruled the royal council for years, guiding Pharaoh's decrees and controlling access to power. To him, Ammonius was an intruder, an insect who had crawled too close to the sun. Pharaoh's kindness has made him blind, Rekhmire hissed one night to the high priest. A slave with a scholar's tongue is still a slave. He must be reminded of that. Despite the growing whispers, Ammonius continued his studies. At night, he still visited Menfer, the old scribe who had once risked everything to teach him. Menfer was now frail, his hair as white as temple stone. "Knowledge will raise you, my son," Menfer told him one evening. "But remember, power without mercy turns men into the very monsters they once feared." Ammonius nodded, holding those words close to his heart. Soon, Egypt faced a terrible drought. The Nile failed to flood, crops withered, and hunger spread across the land. The people murmured that the gods were angry. Pharaoh Seti called for his priests and astrologers, demanding answers, but none could explain the reason for the drought. It was then Ammonius stepped forward. "My lord," he said, bowing low before Pharaoh, "the flood follows the moon and the rains from the south. If we open channels and store the water from the last flood, we can save our crops before the next season." Rekhmire sneered. "You speak of commanding the river itself. Do you think yourself wiser than the gods?" "I only speak of what the gods have already given us," Ammonius replied calmly. Pharaoh leaned forward. "Then you will oversee this task, Ammonius. If you fail, the gods will decide your fate." And so Ammonius was given his first great challenge. He led hundreds of workers to dig canals, build dams, and redirect what little water remained from the shrunken Nile. He worked beside them in the heat, sweating as they did, earning their respect. For the first time, the slaves and commoners saw one of their own command free men. Months passed, and when the next flood season came, Egypt was ready. The waters filled the channels Ammonius had designed, saving the crops and feeding thousands. The people praised Pharaoh, but they whispered another name as well: Ammonius. He became known as the slave who spoke to the river. Pharaoh Seti was impressed beyond measure. During a great festival, he called Ammonius before all of Egypt. "You have done what even priests could not," the pharaoh declared. "From this day, you shall serve as my royal steward, the keeper of Egypt's granaries and master of the river's works." The crowd erupted in cheers. Gold bracelets were placed upon Ammonius' wrists, where chains had once been. But in the shadows of the hall, Vizier Rekhmire's eyes burned with envy. He bowed before Pharaoh but whispered to himself, "A serpent has entered the court, and I shall be the one to crush it." That night, as torches flickered in the palace corridors, Rekhmire summoned his spies. "Watch the slave," he ordered. "Find his weakness. No man rises this high without a secret dragging him down." Ammonius knew nothing of the plots forming around him. To him, the world finally felt open, full of promise. The princess, Nephra, often came to him seeking counsel on matters of trade and the welfare of the poor. Their conversations stretched into long hours, filled with laughter and quiet understanding. She saw in him something rare, a man who listened. One evening, as they stood on the palace terrace overlooking the Nile, Nephra said softly, "Do you ever miss your home, Ammonius?" He looked toward the horizon, where the river met the desert. "Every day," he said. "But I have learned that home is not always where you are born. Sometimes it is the place where you are allowed to dream." Nephra's gaze lingered on him longer than propriety allowed. The princess of Egypt had begun to feel something she could not name. Yet love between a royal and a man born a slave was a dangerous fire, one that could consume them both if it ever burned too brightly. As the moon rose over Thebes, Ammonius felt the first true warmth of his life. But in the darkness behind the golden walls, envy and hatred began to take root. The higher he rose, the more dangerous his fall would become. The palace of Thebes shone like a crown beneath the sun, but even the brightest gold hides shadows. As Ammonius' reputation grew, so did the envy in the hearts of those who feared him. In the royal court, whispers began to twist his name. Some called him wise, others called him dangerous. Pharaoh Seti, proud and aging, trusted Ammonius deeply now. The two spent long hours discussing matters of state, the harvest, the building of temples, and the future of Egypt. Seti saw in Ammonius the spirit of renewal, a man unburdened by the greed that often haunted nobles. But Vizier Rekhmire saw only a threat. For weeks, Rekhmire's spies followed Ammonius. They listened at doorways, searched his quarters, and questioned those who had once known him as a slave. Finally, they brought the vizier a discovery. Ammonius' old friend and secret teacher, Menfer, still lived in the poor district near the temple grounds. Rekhmire smiled like a serpent finding prey. "A secret past," he murmured. "Every man who rises too high forgets where his chains once lay. Let us remind him." That night, Rekhmire ordered Menfer's arrest on false charges of theft from the royal storehouses. The old man was dragged before the council, trembling and weak. Ammonius, shocked and furious, rushed to defend him. "My lord Pharaoh," Ammonius pleaded, "this man is innocent. He taught me to read and serve Egypt better. He gave me wisdom, not crime." Rekhmire bowed deeply and said with false sorrow, "My Pharaoh, it seems our royal steward has long concealed that he was trained in secret by the scribe, without temple authority. Is it not dangerous that a slave, educated outside the law, holds such power now?" The court murmured. Pharaoh looked troubled. The priests frowned. Menfer's old eyes met Ammonius, filled with peace and pride. "Do not speak further," he whispered to Ammonius. "Your path is beyond mine now." Before Pharaoh could decide, Menfer took the blame himself. "I confess," he said. "I taught him. Punish me if you must. But know this, he will bring light to Egypt." Pharaoh sighed heavily. "You have broken sacred rule, Menfer. Yet your years of service cannot be forgotten. You shall not die, but you are banished from Thebes. May the gods forgive you." Ammonius' heart broke as his old mentor was led away in chains. Rekhmire smiled quietly, satisfied that he had struck his first blow. Days turned to weeks, but Ammonius did not yield. He buried his grief in work, overseeing irrigation, building granaries, helping farmers recover from the drought. The people loved him more than ever. They called him the servant of the Nile, and songs began to spread about the slave who saved Egypt. Pharaoh Seti, seeing this love, grew even fonder of Ammonius. One evening, he said, "Ammonius, I have watched you rise with honor. You remind me of my youth, before the crown weighed upon me. Tell me truthfully, do you seek power?" Ammonius bowed low. "I seek only to serve Egypt, my lord. To see no man starve, and no child suffer under the sun." Pharaoh nodded slowly. "Then you are already greater than those who chase thrones. Stay true to your heart, Ammonius." But fate does not let greatness grow without trial. One evening, a messenger arrived from the borders, Rebellion had broken out in the southern provinces. Pharaoh's armies were stretched thin, and the crops from that region supplied much of Egypt. Rekhmire stepped forward in the council. "My Pharaoh, let me lead the army to crush this rebellion." But Pharaoh turned to Ammonius. "You have won the hearts of men through wisdom, not the sword. Perhaps it is time to see if that wisdom can end bloodshed before it begins. Ammonius, will you go?" The court gasped. A slave leading an army? It was unheard of. "I will go," Ammonius said quietly. Within days, Ammonius led a caravan southward, soldiers, scribes, and envoys. When he reached the rebellious province, he did not draw his sword. Instead, he gathered the local chieftains under the shade of palm trees and listened. He learned their grievances. The taxes had been doubled by corrupt overseers loyal to Rekhmire. The people were starving while grain was hoarded for tribute. Ammonius sent word back to Pharaoh, exposing the corruption. Then he promised the chieftains fair trade and equal harvest shares if they laid down their arms. Moved by his honesty, they agreed. Without a single battle, peace returned. When Ammonius came back to Thebes, he brought not war trophies, but wagons of grain and gifts from grateful farmers. Pharaoh received him with open arms before all the court. "You have done what generals could not," Seti declared. "You have conquered hearts with truth. Egypt owes you much." But while the crowd cheered, Rekhmire's rage burned hotter than the desert sun. He could not strike Ammonius openly now, the people would revolt. So he whispered poison instead. That night, he went to Princess Nephra's chambers. "My lady," he said slyly, "the people chant Ammonius' name as if he were already pharaoh. Have you not noticed how often your father favors him? Perhaps soon there will be no place for your own blood on the throne." Nephra's face turned pale. "You lie, vizier. My father trusts him, nothing more." Rekhmire bowed low. "Of course, my princess. Forgive me. I only warn you of the winds of ambition that blow too fiercely in this palace." When he left, his words lingered like a thorn in her heart. She began to doubt what had once felt so pure. Ammonius, unaware of the growing storm, stood by the Nile that night, staring at the stars reflected in its waters. He felt the pull of destiny growing stronger, like the tide beneath the moon. He had risen higher than he ever dreamed, but now he could sense that the next step would either raise him to the throne or cast him into the abyss. The sun rose over Thebes like a molten coin, painting the palace in fire and gold. Ammonius stood at the balcony of his chamber, watching the city come alive, the markets opening, priests chanting to Ra, and the river glimmering like a path of liquid light. Yet within that beauty, a shadow grew that he could not yet name. Pharaoh Seti had grown older. His once mighty voice had become softer, and his steps slower. He still ruled with wisdom, but illness had begun to steal his strength. Often now, he summoned Ammonius to his private garden to talk, not of war or work, but of the past. "My father told me," Seti said one morning, his breath labored, "that a king must rule not with fear, but with the memory of what it means to be human. You have that memory, Ammonius. You have walked among the hungry and the broken. Perhaps the gods sent you here to remind me of that." Ammonius bowed deeply. "My lord, you have been Egypt's light. I only carry a torch that you lit." Seti smiled weakly. "Perhaps so. But every flame must pass to another hand, someday." Those words echoed in Ammonius' heart long after the pharaoh had retired. He did not yet understand their weight, but Rekhmire did. The vizier had been watching closely. He saw the pharaoh's fading strength and Ammonius' rising influence. He knew that if Seti named Ammonius as his successor, or even protector of the throne, his own power would be broken forever. So Rekhmire began his final plan. He bribed the royal guards, whispered lies into the ears of priests, and spread rumors among the nobles. "The slave seeks the crown," they said. "He plans to seize the throne when Pharaoh dies." The word spread like a desert fire carried by the wind. Even Princess Nephra began to grow distant. The doubts Rekhmire had planted now took root. She still cared for Ammonius, but fear clouded her heart. Could the man she admired truly be plotting for the throne? Ammonius felt the chill of those changing eyes around him. In meetings, nobles who once bowed now looked at him with cold suspicion. When he passed through the halls, servants whispered behind their hands. Only Pharaoh remained the same, kind, trusting, and unaware of the poison creeping through his court. Then one night, the unthinkable happened. Pharaoh Seti fell gravely ill. His physicians could not explain it. He lay on his bed, pale and feverish, breathing shallowly. The palace went into mourning. Reckmeyer saw his chance. He entered the royal chamber, feigning loyalty, and bowed beside the dying pharaoh. "My lord," he said softly, "the gods are calling you home. But Egypt trembles. You must name your successor before it is too late." Seti's fading eyes opened slightly. "Bring Ammonius," he whispered. Reckmeyer's jaw tightened. "Yes, my pharaoh," he said, bowing low. But instead of summoning Ammonius, Reckmeyer ordered the guards to seize him. By command of the council, he declared to the startled soldiers, "Ammonius, the steward of Egypt, is accused of treason, of plotting to take the throne through poison and deceit." Ammonius was taken from his chamber in the middle of the night. He did not resist. He only asked, "Who commands this?" "The council," the captain replied uneasily. "And Vizier Reckmeyer." As Ammonius was dragged through the streets toward the prison, the people cried out. Some threw stones, others shouted his name in protest. "He saved us. He saved the Nile." But the soldiers obeyed the vizier's word. In the dungeons beneath the palace, Ammonius was chained once more, the same way he had been many years ago when he first came to Thebes as a slave. The cold walls echoed with the drip of water and the murmurs of other prisoners. Days passed. No message came. No one visited him. Until one night, the sound of light footsteps entered his cell. When the door creaked open, he looked up to see Princess Nephra, her face hidden beneath a veil. "Ammonius," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They say you poisoned my father. Tell me it is not true." He rose slowly, the chains rattling around his wrists. "You have known me all these years," he said softly. "Do you truly need me to tell you that?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I do not know what to believe. The vizier, he has shown the priests evidence, scrolls, even witnesses." Ammonius' face darkened. "Then he has forged them well." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Nephra reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. "If what you say is true, I will find proof. I will save you." She turned and fled before the guards could discover her visit. Meanwhile, Reckmeyer stood in the royal court, weaving his lies. He presented false scrolls, forged with Ammonius' seal, claiming the steward had ordered the preparation of sacred oils, meant to harm Pharaoh. He bribed a servant to swear that Ammonius had mixed the pharaoh's last drink. The priests murmured in horror, and the council condemned Ammonius to death. But before the sentence could be carried out, the sound of running feet echoed through the hall. Princess Nephra burst in, holding a small clay vial in her hand. "This," she cried, "was found in the vizier's chamber. It contains the same poison that sickened my father. Test it, and you will know who the true traitor is." The court fell silent. All eyes turned to Reckmeyer. The old vizier's face twisted in fury. "Lies. The princess has been deceived by that slave." Pharaoh Seti, weak but conscious, was brought forth on a stretcher. His voice trembled, yet carried the weight of command. "Enough," he said. "Bring the priests of medicine. Let them test the vial." Hours passed as the priests compared the poison to what had been found in Pharaoh's cup. When they returned, their faces were grim. "It is the same," one said. "The hand that poisoned the pharaoh is Reckmeyer's, not Ammonius." The court gasped. Reckmeyer tried to flee, but the guards seized him. Pharaoh, with the last of his strength, raised his hand. "You sought to destroy the man who saved Egypt. May your name be erased from every stone." Reckmeyer was dragged away screaming. Justice had been done, but the cost was heavy. Pharaoh Seti died that very night, whispering Ammonius' name. Before his final breath, he said to Nephra, "He will bring Egypt peace. Let him guide you when I am gone." The kingdom mourned for 40 days. When it ended, the priests and nobles gathered to choose a new ruler. The people, rich and poor alike, filled the streets, chanting one name, Ammonius. From the chains of slavery to the edge of death, he had risen beyond every shadow cast upon him. Yet as the crown neared, Ammonius knew this truth deeply. Power was not a prize to be claimed, but a burden to be carried for all. And soon, the burden of Egypt itself would rest upon his shoulders. The morning fires along the Nile burned for 40 nights, their smoke rising to the heavens as if carrying Pharaoh Seti's spirit to the gods. Thebes was silent, cloaked in grief and expectation. Egypt awaited its next ruler. The council gathered beneath the grand columns of the temple of Ammonius Ra. Priests in white linen chanted hymns, while nobles whispered among themselves. Some still doubted. Others had already chosen their hearts. And in the center of that vast hall stood Ammonius, no longer bound, no longer in chains, but dressed in plain linen, humble before the gods and his people. Princess Nephra stepped forward, holding the royal seal of her father. Her voice was clear, steady, though her eyes glistened with tears. My father, Pharaoh Seti, spoke his final wish before the gods. He named Ammonius, servant of Egypt and guardian of the people, as the one most worthy to lead after him. Gasps rippled through the court. The priests murmured prayers. One noble cried out, "A slave cannot wear the crown of Egypt." But the high priest of Ammonius Ra raised his staff. The gods do not look upon the chains of men, but upon the purity of their hearts. And this man, he declared, has saved Egypt when all others failed. With that, silence fell. Ammonius stepped forward, his eyes lowered. If it is the will of Egypt, then I will serve as Pharaoh, not as a god, but as a man who remembers what it is to bow. He knelt as the priest placed upon his head the twin crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, the white crown of the south and the red crown of the north, symbols of unity. The people outside the temple roared with joy, chanting his name as drums thundered across the city. Thus, the slave became Pharaoh Amenhotep I, the servant king. His first act as ruler was not to expand Egypt's armies or build monuments, but to free those who had suffered as he once had. He declared that all slaves who served within the royal palace and its temples would be granted freedom after 7 years of service. He ordered schools to be built where children of all classes could learn to read, as Menfer once taught him. Knowledge, he said to the council, should not belong to a few. It is the Nile of the mind, meant to flow through every heart. The people rejoiced. Farmers, builders, and traders praised his wisdom. For the first time in generations, Egypt thrived not through conquest, but through fairness. Crops flourished, trade routes opened, and peace spread across the land like morning light. But not all were at peace. Some nobles still resented a former slave sitting upon the throne. They met in secret chambers, whispering that Pharaoh Amenhotep had insulted the gods by lowering the walls between master and servant. Their pride could not accept that the man they once ordered around now commanded the realm. Amenhotep knew this. He could feel the sting of their cold smiles and see the shadows behind their bows. Yet he ruled with patience. He had learned long ago that power built on fear was weaker than power born from loyalty. Each night, he stood upon his balcony overlooking the Nile, remembering his journey, the sand under his feet, the chain around his wrists, and Menfer's voice in his ear. Power without mercy turns men into monsters. He swore never to become what he had once feared. Princess Nephra, now queen, stood beside him often. The doubts that had once clouded her heart were gone. She had seen his innocence proven, his kindness endure even through betrayal. Their love, once forbidden, had become a symbol of unity, a bridge between classes, between power and compassion. One evening, as they watched the stars, she said softly, "You have done what no pharaoh before you dared, given the people hope." Amenhotep smiled faintly. "Hope," he said, "is the truest monument a ruler can build." But fate, as always, tested those who rose too high. A terrible famine struck in the eastern provinces. The rains failed again, and the Nile's waters receded. The people prayed to the gods, fearing this was punishment. Some priests whispered that the gods were angered because a man of slave blood now sat upon the throne. Amun-hotep did not respond with anger. Instead, he traveled to the suffering lands himself. He refused royal carriages, walking among the people, eating the same bread they did. He listened to their pain and worked beside the builders who repaired the canals. His presence inspired hope once more. When the rains finally returned, the people said, "The gods heard our Pharaoh's heart." He returned to Thebes weary, yet stronger in spirit. The court expected him to celebrate his success with feasts, but instead, he went alone to the temple where Menfer had once taught him. There, he offered gold and grain in honor of his old teacher, now long gone. "Without your wisdom," Amun-hotep whispered, kneeling before the altar, "I would still be a slave in the darkness. May the gods grant you peace among the stars." As the years passed, Egypt entered an age of prosperity. The slave who had once bowed before kings now stood as the greatest among them, not through conquest, but through compassion. In the murals painted on the temple walls, Pharaoh Amun-hotep was depicted not with a whip or sword, but holding an open hand, a symbol of mercy and balance. Beneath his image were inscribed the words he often spoke to his people. "No man is born a slave before the gods. Only ignorance makes one bow." Yet, even as glory surrounded him, Amun-hotep remained humble. He often walked through the streets in disguise, speaking to farmers and merchants as if he were one of them. When asked why, he simply said, "A ruler must never forget the sound of the people's voice, for that is where his power truly lives." In the twilight of his reign, as age began to slow him, Amun-hotep stood once more upon his balcony, overlooking the river that had carried his destiny. The stars above shimmered like the dreams of his youth. He whispered, "From chains to crown, from dust to dawn, the Nile remembers all." May Egypt never forget that greatness can rise from anywhere. The wind carried his words across the river, through the city, into the hearts of his people, where they lived for generations as legend. A slave had become pharaoh. A man had become more than his birth. And in doing so, he had taught Egypt that the truest crown is not made of gold, but of compassion, courage, and wisdom.